what makes Aafia unique among all the people I've represented, and it's now over 100 in this war of terror. She was driving to the airport in Karachi, and she was going up to Islamabad to have meetings about what she did, which was she was an educationalist. She had a PhD in education from Brandeis. And she had her 3 kids with her. And in the car on the way to the airport, they were in a taxi. She was having a debate with her son Ahmed, who was 6. And Ahmed was a big fan of Thomas the Tank Engine. And he was arguing forcefully for going by train instead of plane, because that's what he wanted to do. And they were talking about that when suddenly these cars surrounded them, and people, and we know who they are, people from the Pakistan authorities and the CIA, grabbed them out of the car. Now, what happened was first they grabbed Ahmed, age 6, and they put him in another car. They grabbed Mariam, age 3, and they put her in another car. And then they grabbed Aafia, who was clinging on to Suleiman, age 6 months, her youngest child. And they pulled her out of the car. And apparently, this has never been confirmed, but Ahmed saw him on the ground, that they'd accidentally, I suspect, pulled this little infant out of her hands and dropped him on his head. And we think that he died from head injuries. Now, we don't know that for sure. And when I continue with the story, you may have your doubts. And one thing I would ask everyone out there who's got children is, or who doesn't have children, it doesn't make a difference, is would you want to know? Would you want to know if your youngest child was dead or alive? And, this is the first of Aafia's traumas, unique in all of this whole madness.
How are you doing, Clive?
I'm doing well, thank you very much.
For the sake of the audience, we're joined today by Clive Stafford Smith, who is a human rights lawyer and the director of a non-profit known as the Justice League. And as you said,
I'm Thor Ragnarok. Yeah,
you're Thor Ragnarok of the Justice League. The Justice League is a non-profit that it's a civil rights organization that wants to protect. Is it specifically targeted towards inmates or people in the justice system?
Really, what it is, I've had various charities I've founded over the years, and now the Justice League is really, as far as I'm concerned, trying to foster the next generation of human rights defenders, because I'm of an age where I think I need to pass it on. And so, I have a lot of young people. I've got 35 students this summer, and they'll be working on my cases, which range from a lot of death penalty cases in the US and around the world, but also increasingly since 9/11, people who have been caught up in the war of terror, as Borat calls it, because that's just the new way of hating people, and we hate Muslims now instead of just hating young black men.
Right. I think there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, the Borat reference from Thor Ragnarok to the Borat, I think, I don't know how relevant that is anymore. But a lot of comedians and a lot of free speech advocates have taken jabs at the war on terror moniker that was given to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in the past 20 years. And I think it's fairly appropriate to call it the war of terror. That's what we call it over here. And I don't know if it's just as simple as a hatred for people that we don't understand or don't consider as our equals. I think it's a bit more than that, but I think it's fairly appropriate considering the actions that we've seen in the prisons. Because one would think that if it was a war, even the non-governmental militias or even quote-unquote terrorists would be given the status of POWs, which is one of the things I'd always assumed that would be a given, but that was not. The decision that America made to treat non-government combatants as combatants, and then how did that come about, and isn't that a violation of everything that we've established post-World War?
I think it is worth drilling down a bit into all of this, because with all of the work I've done through my career, and it's gone on for over 40 years now, it's been about the politics of hatred. And unfortunately, politicians far too often look for a group that they can inspire the populace to hate and fear. So with death row, for example, in America, we have massive problems of crime, of lack of education, lack of health services, and lack of all these different things because of the extremities of American capitalism. And, this creates problems. I mean, I myself have been held up at gunpoint 7 times in America because of this madness. And you've got 2 choices. You can either do something sensible that's long term, which takes a lot of political and economic investment, or you can just try to inspire people with hatred for a small group and blame it all on them. And what we did with the death penalty was we said a group of primarily or disproportionately young black men were the cause of all of our crime problems, which of course is total nonsense. And that was a way that we diverted real issues. Now, that worked for many elections in the US. But when 9/11 came along, it was madness. It was the greatest senseless crime in American history. But instead of approaching it sensibly as just a mad thing where a bunch of innocent people got killed by some crazy people, instead we wanted to create this new specter of fear that we could hold up as the threat to America. And if you look at what's happened in the US in the last 20 years, there have been 0 attacks by Muslims coming from outside America to attack America. I mean, it just hasn't happened. And yet we've turned this into the greatest threat known to humanity. And we've gone around the world attacking Afghanistan and then Iraq, and creating all sorts of problems that were exacerbated. And I suppose the greatest way of looking at it is this. When the US assassinated Osama bin Laden, he had on his computer a list of the entirety of Al-Qaeda in 2000. And it was a page of 120 people, 20 of whom were dead, 5 of whom were his children. That was the entire threat against the United States and the rest of the world by Al-Qaeda. By vilifying bin Laden and starting the war in Afghanistan and so forth, we have so inspired the world with hatred that we've turned an awful lot of people against us. And we've made the world a much less safe place for everybody. And, this is typical of the politics of hatred. And if we could just get past that to sanity and deal with being human to each other and being relatively pleasant where possible and just applying the rules, that would be a good thing. But we didn't apply the rules, for example, in the one you suggest, POWs and the Geneva Conventions, because the moment the truth comes out, the world sees what total nonsense it is. So with Guantanamo Bay, the greatest example, we said that everyone there was the worst of the worst terrorists in the world. And over the last 22 years that I've been working on Guantanamo, we've proven that of the 780 people there, they've released over 99% of them, or they've cleared them, meaning that we had all the wrong people. And I hate to tell you this, but a big part of that was Pakistan selling people for bounties under the Musharraf regime. And Guantanamo was a big lie. And from the very beginning, when I first went there, our whole philosophy was, if we open it up, they'll close it down, because the world will see that this is nonsense. And the world will see that that this is just a charade to pretend that we're doing something against this bogeyman that we've created.
No, I mean...
Sorry, that was not a long answer to
No,
it.
not at all. It was perfectly worded. There's no need to apologize. We were fully aware of the Musharraf government's actions and the way they operated. First of all, from the get-go, them supporting the Americans in this absurd war against a neighbor that we have to live with forever. Also, we share a common culture with the Pashtun culture. It was completely absurd from a policy position, but that's what you get when you have military dictators. That's what you get. You get maybe at best a small cabinet of technocrats making decisions for you know, 250 million people. And we lost over 100,000 people in the subsequent blowback from the war on terror in Afghanistan, in our own territory in Pakistan. We lost billions of dollars. We have no idea in terms of when we're going to recover that sort of loss and damage. We're in a constant state of polarization, ethnic, cultural, linguistic. We had a lot of religious extremism. We basically brought America's war to our shores. We've ruined our relationship effectively with Iran as well as Afghanistan. But that's what you get. That's what you get for trading with the Americans in terms of in their foreign wars. This idea that these people should have been POWs, that's a separate thing under the Geneva Convention. But the fact that they had to pay a third world dictator to sell them bounties, I think, is a bit of a telltale sign in terms of how accurate they were, in terms of picking these people up. There wasn't some, FISA court or some shadow judge sitting and giving out warrants. These were military contractors and operators just randomly deciding on whether or not the intel being shared to them by the Pakistani intelligence services or the Jordanian intelligence services or any one of these third world dictatorial intelligence services were accurate or not. And that's what you ended up with in Guantanamo.
Of course, that's right. I've got to say, when I first went to Guantanamo, we had to sue to get in there. And so I didn't get in there until 2004. And I first went down there. I thought, wow, I'm going to have to do a lot of explaining for these guys because presumably a lot of them were on the battlefield of Afghanistan. And, whether it's Americans' business or not, we're going to have to look into that. And it turned out to be totally nonsense. And there was this cyclical system where the Americans would offer bounties, which were big amounts of money for someone in a country that doesn't have as much as America. And the Musharraf's people would turn him in, and it amused me that in his book, In the Line of Fire, he bragged about it and said that more than half of the prisoners in Guantanamo had been sold for a bounty to the Americans, which he took out of the Urdu version of his book because he wasn't meant to say. But, then the Americans got these people. And one of the great examples was Mohammed al-Ghurani. He was a kid from Saudi Arabia who came to Pakistan when he was 14 to get an education because a black kid in Saudi Arabia couldn't. And he'd never been to Afghanistan. And when he was sold for a bounty, they said he was some al-Qaeda person, which of course he wasn't. And the US starts interrogating him using abusive methods, but also using a profound level of ignorance. They used a translator who was from Yemen, who spoke Yemeni Arabic, where the word zalat meant money, whereas the word zalat in Saudi Arabia meant salad or tomatoes. And so they start interrogating this child about, when you came to Pakistan, what zalat did you have? And he thought these people were idiots. And he said, I didn't have any zalat, because he thought they were talking about salad. And he said, I could get zalat anywhere I wanted it in Karachi. And so the Americans thought that meant that these were al-Qaeda financial centers. And they start interrogating him about that. And he lists a number of vegetable stalls in Karachi. And they wrote all that down, and they go chasing after these vegetable stalls, thinking they're some sort of al-Qaeda financial centers. And this kid ended up in Guantanamo for 5 years.
Well, I thought you were going to say his interrogators ended up at a salad bar.
No. I think they did. That was all they found. But we had endless things like that. And once they tortured people, the people would ultimately confess to whatever they wanted. And at that point, the Americans didn't think they were torturing innocent people. They believed the nonsense that Musharraf had fed them. And as a result, they held them and abused them for many, many years. And then when we finally got into a real court, it was just embarrassing for the US. Because obviously they didn't have any evidence of anything. But the US tried to stop us getting into a real court. And that was why they denied the Geneva Conventions. And we had to take him to the US Supreme Court 3 times, and even a conservative US Supreme Court.
And
killed another.
you've had a fair bit of success with the inmates in Guantanamo, and we thank you for that. And more power to you and the Justice League. It's an honorable thing. Are there any other active cases other than Aafia that you're currently pursuing that are in Guantanamo?
There are 30 people left in Guantanamo. I still represent some there. 17 of the 30 are cleared for release. And the reason they haven't been released was specifically, there was a deal on the table to release 11 of the Yemenis. I represent one of them. But then when the October thing happened in Palestine, the US reneged on that. Why? It's not my client's fault in Guantanamo that something happened in Gaza. So, this is an ongoing battle. I'm still also trying to help some of the final people who haven't been cleared. And, for example, Mohammed Rahim, who the Americans thought was some big deal. He's the last Afghan in Guantanamo Bay. He is nobody when it comes to terrorism. And indeed, I'm afraid that's another one where the Pakistanis are to blame, because it was a relative of his in Lahore who made up all sorts of lies about him. And we got to get these people back. We got to get them out. And if we don't do it between now and January the 21st, when I'm very afraid we'll have Donald Trump as our president again, then it's going to be very difficult to resolve those issues for another 4 years.
Was the Trump administration difficult to deal with when it came to, were you working on these cases at that time as well?
Oh, yes. I've been working on them continually. And under Trump, only one person got out, and that was Ahmed al-Darbi. He got out by cutting a deal, by lying against Abd al-Nashiri in the USS Cole case. So he cut a deal where he testified falsely about al-Nashiri. He then admitted that to my client, Ahmed Rabani, and he got out. But that was the only person in the whole 4 years that Trump was in office. So Trump just goes on about how he's going to fill it up with bad dudes. I think he's the person who's most likely to get locked up in Guantanamo anytime soon. But I'm afraid we're going to treat him while he's in office.
So the Aafia case, now a lot of people will peripherally in Pakistan know about the Aafia case, regardless of whether or not they read the news or not, but they'll have some idea of that there was this woman and that she got abducted by the Americans, and then it becomes all hazy for them. And from time to time, people will get updates on family WhatsApp groups or maybe a headline on the news or something. But I don't think there's been a sort of all-encompassing, facts of the case from the first day that it was reported from her disappearance to where do we stand now in 2024. So Clive has been gracious enough, and that he's agreed to go through the facts of the case from the beginning, and I will not interrupt you.
No, you're welcome to interrupt.
If I think from the perspective of the audience, if there's a question worth asking, I might interject. But can you start from the perspective of Aafia, because you and her sister are and then Mr. Mushtaq, the ex-senator, I think you've met him as well, perhaps. You guys have had the closest sort of access to her in the last however many years. So if you can narrate it in terms of what she experienced, I think that would be best, because that's not a perspective that you get in the news media these days.
Well, let me lay a bit of groundwork, because the key to understand here is that the US, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agencies, lied about this all along. And that's one principle that's incredibly important. And they didn't just lie to you in Pakistan, they lied to their own senators. But a second factor that's really important, which is classic of all of these things, is I've been to Afghanistan 3 times in the last 6 months to investigate about what really happened, because that's where most of this happened. And for 20 years, no one had been to investigate the truth about Aafia. And this is always the case, that if you're poor or if you're stuck in prison in the middle of nowhere in Guantanamo or in Texas, you've got to have someone who does the investigation, and she hasn't. So let's start at the very beginning. First, the US government takes the position that she never was abducted. Well, of course, that's mad. We know that's mad. On March the 30th, 2003, what makes Aafia unique among all the people I've represented, and it's now over 100 in this war of terror, she was driving to the airport in Karachi, and she was going up to Islamabad to have meetings about what she did, which was she was an educationalist. She had a PhD in education from Brandeis. And she had her 3 kids with her. And in the car on the way to the airport, they were in a taxi. She was having a debate with her son Ahmed, who was 6. And Ahmed was a big fan of Thomas the Tank Engine. And he was arguing forcefully for going by train instead of plane, because that's what he wanted to do. And they were talking about that when suddenly these cars surrounded them, and people, and we know who they are, people from the Pakistan authorities and the CIA, grabbed them out of the car. Now, what happened was first they grabbed Ahmed, age 6, and they put him in another car. They grabbed Mariam, age 3, and they put her in another car. And then they grabbed Aafia, who was clinging on to Suleiman, age 6 months, her youngest child. And they pulled her out of the car. And apparently, this has never been confirmed, but Ahmed saw him on the ground, that they'd accidentally, I suspect, pulled this little infant out of her hands and dropped him on his head. And we think that he died from head injuries. Now, we don't know that for sure. And when I continue with the story, you may have your doubts. And one thing I would ask everyone out there who's got children is, or who doesn't have children, it doesn't make a difference, is would you want to know? Would you want to know if your youngest child was dead or alive? And, you know, this is the first of Aafia's traumas, unique in all of this whole madness. Second, both Ahmed and Mariam were US citizens. In my mind, that should make no difference. I value a Pakistani child as much as I value an American child, but that's not true of American. So these are kids with US passports. We, the Americans, took them 1,000 kilometers, it is, from Karachi to Kabul. And first we forcibly adopted the Mariam, age 3, into a white Christian family from America of Josh and Natasha. We know their names. On the principle, which I think is utterly nutty, that you're better off being an American Christian than a Pakistani Muslim. And so she was renamed Fatima, and she stayed with that family for 7 years. And she only got out of it, I'll tell you how it happened, in 2009, thanks to the incredible work of her amazing aunt, Fauzia, Aafia's elder sister. And Fauzia is one of my great heroes. I think she's shown incredible dedication, and we'll talk more about Fauzia. So then, you know, however nutty it is to think that being a Christian, you know, but you can understand their mad mentality, right? They honestly think that that child is only going to heaven if she's Christian. What happened to Ahmed is just unfathomable. I just cannot understand, even in the nutty world of the US war on terror, what they did to him. He was 6 years old. He was an American citizen. We took him to Kabul. We put him in prison, and we said, henceforth your name is Ihsan Ali, and if you ever say that you're Ahmed, son of Aafia Siddiqui, we'll kill you. And he was in prison for the next 5 years, and it was drummed into him that he should never say he was Ahmed. And he certainly took that on board, and, you know, I'll come back to that story in a few minutes. So then we took Aafia Siddiqui, the only woman to be a central focus of the US rendition to torture program. And we took her first to Bagram Air Force Base. Now, the US has denied this all along, but one of the great joys of my life is I get to go everywhere, right? Because, you know, I helped represent half of the Taliban government when they were in Guantanamo. So now it's much easier to travel around Afghanistan, and they've been incredibly welcoming and helpful.
You're like the old school teacher coming back, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't think they would view me as a school teacher, but the one thing I really like about well, several things about their government. First, they've restored peace to their country, but second, they understand what happened to Aafia and other people because they went through it themselves. I mean, you mentioned a while back Rishi Sunak. Honestly, if we put all of our American and British governments in Guantanamo for a couple of years, I think it'd do them a little good. They'd figure out what life's all about instead of all the nonsense they do. Anyway, so Aafia was taken to Bagram. The Taliban were kind enough to let me go there with some of the people I've located with their help who saw Aafia in Bagram. And we have a number of eyewitnesses, about 8 so far, but we'll have more in due course, who saw her there. And I went to Bagram on my most recent trip and filmed the isolation cells where she was held. So this is the first time we've actually proven precisely where she was. She describes what happened in those cells, and it's pretty shocking, but it's, sadly it's standard for what the US did, which is she describes being strapped to a chair and looking through a one-way glass while the US was purporting to torture 2 children who she thought were her own children, thought were her daughter Mariam and her son Ahmed. And I don't think they were. I think this was staged, much as so much of this stuff was staged to just terrify. And she's described to me how she thought the only way she could stop the torture was to pretend she didn't care, because the more she cared, the more they would do it. This is horrifying, isn't it? So Aafia is kept in Bagram and then in another prison.
So you think they were simulating some kind of with dolls or something?
No, they had real children, and they were purporting to abuse those real children. And this isn't unique. They did it with women, and they pretended they had women shrieking in the room next door when they were pretending to other prisoners that they were torturing their wives and loved ones. And it is true, and it's something I never thought I'd learn about, but go back to the Spanish Inquisition in the 16th century. They knew that second-degree torture is more effective than first-degree torture, as in, you torture me, I can probably deal with that. I'll make up whatever I have to make up to try and get you to stop it. But if you pretend to do it to one of my family, or if you do it to one of my family, then that has a much bigger impact, right? Because I can deal with what you're doing to me, but I can't deal with what you're doing to someone I love. And that's what the US was doing a lot of the time. And it's disgusting that in the 21st century, we're talking about this, particularly, we expect that of tin pot dictators, but for the US to say that they're the masters of human rights and then do it is just a nightmare. And it's something that, I view it as my job to put an end to that sort of nonsense. So Aafia went through all of this. We can at some point talk about why they thought she was a terrorist, because this has been really interesting to unpick. But they thought she was involved in some weapons of mass destruction nonsense, as they did with so many other prisoners. And so they'd abused her into writing up stuff about nuclear bombs and things, which I've now seen. And look, I was a physicist when I was young. And I saw the light and became a human rights lawyer. But it is quite fun to go back and look at that material and see what total nonsense it is. So she was tortured into writing out some how to build a nuclear bomb nonsense. But in the end, the Americans figured out that she was nobody and decided they were going to get rid of her, as they have with over 98% of the prisoners they've held. So here's where the Pakistanis come back in. Unfortunately, this was 2008 now. She had been locked up for 5 years. Her daughter was with this American family for 5 years. Her son, Ahmed, was in prison for 5 years. The US decided that they had it wrong. So they're going to get rid of her. Now, the US didn't care, right? They could care less. They don't care about just another person that they wrongfully detained. The people who really cared at that point were the Pakistanis, because Musharraf was still in power. And his people had been behind all of this nonsense. And so this is where they came up with a conspiracy. And I don't believe in most conspiracy theories. I think most conspiracy theories are just silly. This one, unfortunately, is true, and we got pictures. And I know who was involved in it. And the Pakistani authorities need to know I know who's involved in it. I haven't named them publicly yet because they need to cooperate with me to get Aafia justice.
All
anyway,
right.
What happened? Yeah, I would say that as often as possible. And I'm not here to ruin people's lives. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. So this is what happened. So the Americans want to get rid of...
Clive has just claimed that he is aware of the conspiracy that he's about to share with us, who the instigators or the planners were, and that they should try their best to cooperate with you guys in helping getting Aafia back. Otherwise, it's very likely that they will get exposed, and that wouldn't be for the best.
It wouldn't be for the best for anyone. I'm not here to ruin people's lives. But the bottom line is they must not ruin Aafia, her life, and the life of her family.
Any further.
Any further. That's my job, right? And I've been doing this to the Americans for years. We've got all but 2 of the people we got out of Guantanamo was not as a result of a court order at all, but it was as a result of public exposure of embarrassing things.
And these names,
and I always give
this information, do your members of your team know of this, or is it just you?
Oh, look, don't worry. No one can off me. If they want to stop it, I've got it all documented.
All right.
I got pictures.
And I just want to clarify that Clive is not suicidal. He loves life.
I'm not suicidal. I do love life. I don't really care. I've had a great life, so I don't care what they do to me.
All right.
But I don't think they're going to, because I'm what we call an OPWM, right? You know what that means?
No, what is that?
You don't. The reason you don't know what it means is I made it up. But OPWM is an old privileged white male. And so, people are welcome to come after me if they want, but it's not going to do them much good.
Right.
Anyway, going back to our conspiracy, this is so typical of the ISI. It's not typical of the Americans. The Americans just wouldn't get this complicated. So what happened was Aafia is released from her detention that's controlled by the Americans. And she's told that if she goes to a place called Ghazni in Afghanistan, about 150k southwest of Kabul, she can have her daughter back. And then she can buzz off back to Pakistan, and as long as she keeps quiet about everything, life will progress happily. That was all nonsense. She's put on a bus with a boy called Ihsan Ali. And Ihsan Ali is her son Ahmed, and for 5 years he's been abused. And he doesn't even tell his mom that it's Ahmed because he's so terrified.
And she doesn't recognize him.
This continues. She's not sure it's him. She's been told it's him, but she hadn't seen him for 5 years. He was 6 last time she saw him.
And these 5 years have been in Bagram.
Bagram and another women's prison outside in Kabul. So women's place where the women were tortured, and she's described to me how they were right there too. I mean, this poor woman has been through so much. So she's put on this bus with Ihsan Ali, and also with a Pakistani agent. When I told the Taliban that he was a spy, they laughed because apparently spy in Pashto means a dog. But I didn't know that.
Yeah, spy.
Oh, there we go. Well, there you've corroborated it. So anyway, this Pakistani guy, I've got a picture of him. You're welcome to publish it if you want, because I want to track this guy down.
Sure.
As a bag.
You can share it with me afterwards. We'll put it up here.
Okay, I'll do that. So there's a bag that he's carrying that has a bunch of seemingly incriminating stuff against Aafia. Aafia has been told to go to this mosque called the Khalid bin Walid Mosque in Ghazni, which I've, of course, been to several times and got witnesses from it. And at the Khalid bin Walid Mosque, if she sits there, they're going to supposedly deliver her daughter to her. But all of that's nonsense. This is a conspiracy to murder her. And the way it goes is this, that her son, Ahmed, has got a coat on. It's July the 17th, middle of summer, but he's got a coat on with 4 big pockets, and those pockets have big bits of fruit in it. that is obviously designed to make this child look like a suicide bomber. Aafia's got a full chador on, so you can't see what she's got underneath, and she's meant to be a suicide bomber too. They've already called in, before the bus leaves, they've called in a suicide bomber warning, saying there's going to be a suicide bomber outside this mosque, to the Afghan National Police in Ghazni. So all of this is set up to get her killed. And, there was a whole bunch of other suicide attacks on mosques around this time. And they were going to do what they always did, which is come to the scene, ring it at 100 feet distance, start yelling at her. They were speaking Farsi. She doesn't understand Farsi. And they would have ended up shooting her and the boy. And then they would have planted this evidence on her to show that she was some evil terrorist. And the story that would have come back to Pakistan would have been evil Al-Qaeda woman. It turns out to be a suicide bomber and was even having her child killed. That was the story that Pakistan was meant to hear about Aafia Siddiqui, that was going to prove that all along she'd been a bad person. So, as usual, these things go awry. And the reason this plan went awry was because of a man I tracked down in Ghazni, whose name is Mohammed Ajmal Mohammadi, who was a tailor, whose tailor shop was right across the street from the Khalid bin Walid Mosque. And she's sitting there. She sat there for 7 hours, which for certain things I won't go into is actually very important in the whole story because it shows what nonsense it all was. But people would go up to her. She couldn't talk to them because she didn't speak Farsi. And this tailor watches this for a bit. And finally, as it's getting dusk, he goes out because it's a war zone, right? It's 2008 in the middle of Afghanistan. It's getting dark. And he says, he speaks Urdu because he'd been in Pakistan doing his tailoring. And so he's able to communicate with her. And he says, you really shouldn't stay here. It's going to be dangerous. My auntie lives around the corner. Why don't you go stay the night there? And they're having this conversation, and she's saying, no, I've got to wait here. Someone's going to be delivered to me. And they're in the middle of that conversation when 50 ANP people show up with their AK-47s, and they're going to shoot her. Now, the only reason she doesn't get killed is because Mohammadi, who is one of my great heroes in this whole thing, stands between her and the guns and says, "You're mad." Yeah. And so he says, she's not a suicide bomber. Neither's this kid. Stop it. And anyway, it's very aggressive. One of them rushes up and rips her chador off, which, really pisses Mohammadi off because he thinks that's just disgusting. And anyway, he stops them from killing her. So then the Afghan National Police take her in, and they take her to the headquarters. And they discover she really is no threat. She tells them she's Aafia Siddiqui, contrary to what the Americans later say. She tells them the story, and the only allegation they have against her is that she doesn't have a visa to be in Afghanistan. And so they're holding her there, and they're going to send her, they say, back to Pakistan. But then the Americans learn that she's been detained in Ghazni. Now, one of the fabulous ironies of this is the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, didn't know that Aafia had been in CIA secret detention for the last 5 years. The FBI thinks she's been wandering around as a member of Al-Qaeda, the gray woman of whatever. And so they think they're about to make a great arrest. So they come rushing into Ghazni to interrogate her. Now, the Afghan authorities tell the Americans to buzz off 3 times until finally one of the Americans bribes the head of police and gets permission to come in and talk to her. And she, in the meantime, is just on this bed in this room behind a curtain. And she wants to get out of here and go back to Pakistan. And the Americans come in the room, and she peeks from behind the curtain to see what's going on, and she hears the voices. And one of the Americans says, "Oh my God, she's on the loose," and shoots her, pulls a gun and shoots her twice in the stomach. Well, then they figure out, oh my goodness, this is an unarmed woman. We're in trouble. there'd been a series of prosecutions against Americans for illicit use of force in Afghanistan. So that's when they make up this story, and it's a fabulously bad story. That one of them put his M4 machine gun on the ground.
But did she overpower them once she'd been shot in the stomach twice, or after? Or before?
No. That never happened. That was all.
Obviously, I mean, she's a very. If you even look at her, she's like, I don't know, like 50 kilos, 60 kilos.
Yeah,
she's a tiny woman.
She's a tiny, unarmed woman in the face of 8 heavily armed Americans with a whole bunch of other people. And, this story just is total nonsense. They say this chief warrant officer puts his M4.
Just a little caveat. The common thread, just like how history in Palestine started on the 7th of October, the history of Aafia Siddiqui tends to start right here. Yeah. The 5 years prior to this are not commonly discussed. They're not commonly discussed.
You're totally right. And the reason for that so-called trial later in New York is because the defense didn't know anything about her 5 years. And actually, I don't think they even believed it, because everyone was lying about it then. And no one went to Afghanistan, as I have, to find the facts out.
And you've corroborated, you've met Mohammadi the tailor, you've met people who saw her at the masjid. You've met people who saw her in Bagram Air Base and in the other jail around Kabul. What was it called again?
Yeah, all the different places. I've got witnesses, and I haven't just met them. I've taken witness statements from them and recorded them, because this is really important.
And you hope to present this in an American court?
Yeah, I'm writing it up. I'm currently at 32,000 words. I mean, it's a book. But, every single thing the Americans said was wrong. Everything. I mean, they barely got a single fact right. And I don't blame the people who did it, frankly, because this was all the CIA getting everything wrong as usual. It takes quite a lot of work to unpick what the CIA does, because they're all, they feel like they have a constitutional right to lie to everyone. Anyway, to go back to Ghazni, according to the US now, the soldiers get together and say, oh, damn, we're in trouble now. So they make up this story. And whenever people make up stories, it's inevitable that they're all full of holes. So the first thing is they say this warrant officer put his M4 machine gun on the ground. That would never, ever happen. Then they say Aafia Siddiqui, little, spindly little woman, reaches down, grabs the machine gun, flips off the safety catch. Can I just ask you, where is the safety catch on an M4 machine gun?
I skipped that part in jihad training school.
But you really shouldn't. I'm shocked at you. I think it's disgusting. You'll never make a good jihadi.
No, I won't. I suspect, if I had to take an educated guess, I suspect it would be somewhere within thumb's reach of the receiver. I don't know.
You'd like to think so, but you don't know whether it's left-handed or right-handed.
No, I have no idea.
Anyway, I was asking some of the jihadis, the people, the Mujahideen guys, and they didn't know because they had AK-47.
AK-47, yeah.
Anyway, Aafia supposedly flips it off and fires a couple of rounds at people in a small room. It's a very small room, misses them, 2 holes in the wall up near the ceiling. Those are meant to be the bullet holes she fired. Then the heroic people in the room wrestle her to the ground, and one of them shoots her. That's what supposedly happened. Now, what's fascinating about this is, even Winston Churchill said that, if you don't lie in the first place, you don't have to remember what you said. In this case, the 2 holes in the wall, we discover a videotape taken in that same room earlier on, before this whole event. 2 holes in the wall, right? So they were there before this whole thing happened, which just goes to show what nonsense it is. They were actually where they hung pictures on the wall. Everyone should have known that, because they tried to dig out bullets from the 2 holes in the wall.
There was no ballistics?
No bullets. There's no shells from an M4 rifle. There's no bullets. There's no gunshot residue on her. There's no gunshot residue on the curtain. There's no fingerprints from her on the gun. All of that's nonsense, right? And so it's clear that they made that nonsense up. But the problem for Aafia is she's rushed off to Bagram again and put in hospital, and they saved her from dying. She came very close to dying. And then 2 weeks later, on August the 4th, 2008, she's flown to New York, where she's put on trial. But she has these lawyers who don't do the investigation. And to give them some credit, it was pretty hard to do it in the middle of 2008 and 2009 in Afghanistan. But the only witnesses put on at trial are the ones that the Americans bring. And so they're just the ones who tell the story the US want to hear. And she's convicted of attempted murder of 2 federal officials, which is extraordinary in the sense you're talking about POWs before. She's in a war zone. Last I heard, the point of wars was for you to shoot at someone else. And so quite why she wouldn't have the right to do that is hard to fathom. But she didn't do it anyhow. But they put her on trial. She's convicted, and she's given 86 years in prison. Now, the various people in Guantanamo who remain there include folk like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who, according to the US, was behind 9/11, who's responsible for 3,000 murders. He's potentially going to get a plea agreement sometime soon where he will spend less time in prison than Aafia Siddiqui. This is just horrifying. And then the prison she's in, but let's just hold up for a second, because the little boy is in the room next door. The Afghans take him off and put him back in prison. The Americans act like that they heroically rescue this American boy. It's not true. He's put back in an Afghan prison. Now, in the meantime, it's got into the Pakistan media that Aafia Siddiqui has been detained in Ghazni. And Fauzia sees the pictures and sees the boy and recognizes him as Ahmed. So for the first time in 5 years, she's got reason to search in Afghanistan. Now, in the meantime, she's been stirring up all sorts of support for her sister and her niece and nephew. And indeed, that's part of the reason that the Musharraf people want to get rid of Aafia. But now she's looking, so she gets the Red Cross to go search the prisons, and they find the boy. And the Red Cross take in pictures of Aafia and Fauzia to show to this boy who they think is Ahmed. He denies being Ahmed. He says he's Ihsan Ali. He's been told that he'd be killed if he doesn't. So he continues to deny that he's Ahmed. He denies knowing who Aafia and Fauzia are. And all of this is documented, and I've got the documentation. But then, just as they're leaving, he says in a plaintive little voice, "Can I keep the pictures?" And so they give him the pictures. But at this point, Fauzia is convinced this kid probably is Ahmed. So though she is unstoppable, she insists on getting a call with him. And so they go back and have another visit with him where Fauzia gets a call. Now, for all of his life, Ahmed had called Fauzia Adda, which means nothing, but it's just a sort of lovable little name. And Fauzia has quite a unique, slightly high-pitched voice. And when she comes on the phone, even though he's been told to deny he's Ahmed, she says a word, and he says, Adda. And to Fauzia, that's better than DNA, right? This has to be Ahmed. So while he continues to deny he is Ahmed, she gets DNA done, it is Ahmed, and they bring him back to Pakistan. Now, at that point, the U.S. ambassador's people say to Fauzia, who, as you may recall, is a neurologist who has studied at Harvard and, is just a very well-known, really extremely intelligent, well-educated person. The Americans say, you should give this American child up for adoption. He can go to America and have a good life. And Fauzia says, you mean he might be adopted by an American doctor who may be one who went to Harvard, who is going to give him a good life? And they say, yes. And she says, well, that's me. So it's just the Americans continue to be incredibly offensive about this. But now Fauzia knows to be looking in Afghanistan. And also, now that you know that Ahmed was in this jail all the time, you begin to wonder what happened to Suleiman, the 6-month-old, because maybe he didn't die. Maybe he was adopted into some American family and is now 21 years old in Baltimore or somewhere. But in the meantime, Fauzi is trying to find her niece, Mariam. And she's told by Rehman Malik, who was then the interior minister, that the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, is coming to Islamabad. So she goes to Islamabad. She meets with Karzai, gives him chocolates and roses, and tells him the sad story and begs him to help her get her niece back. And to his credit, he does. And this is one reason that the US just can't deny what they are denying.
Was she in America at that time?
No, she wasn't. She was still in Afghanistan. And this means...
The white family was in Afghanistan?
Yeah. So that means they have to have been CIA, right?
Oh, wow. This is actual, like, nutcase stuff. These people are sick.
Yeah, it is. But it's not the only time. I mean, if you just Google the name Josh Mast, and you'll find a much more recent case where an American Marine Corps major took an Afghan child. They did a raid on some Afghan family, killed them all except for this little baby. And this guy, Marine Corps Major Josh Mast, took her with his wife to America to give the child a good life. And then the Afghan family said, wait a minute, the extended family said, give us our child back. And that's in litigation at the moment. It's been going on for 4 or 5 years. So it's not the only time that the US did this. It's just pretty shocking what we did. Anyway, what happens is Karzai gets the child back. And, look, Karzai is cooperating with us, which is good. Just to prove that what the Americans say is not true, and just to prove the truth. That's all we're trying to do. So Karzai then gets the child back and sends the kid to Pakistan, where in the end, with all of these things, your Pakistani authorities want the whole family to sign non-disclosure things. You've got to keep secret. You mustn't say anything about this. And they've honored this by and large. And I want to make another statement for your beloved intelligence officers there in Pakistan. I am Aafia's lawyer. I'm not Fauzia's lawyer. I'm not the kid's lawyer. And they can't control me. And it's not their fault that I'm going around telling the truth. So you can't go punishing them because there's nothing they can do to stop me from doing it. Although they keep on trying to stop them. So what happens then is Fauzia doesn't sign this agreement because they want her to sign it without reading it. And she says, I can't do that. So then a little while later, they end up dumping this little girl on the streets of in the neighborhood of the Siddiqui's house in Karachi with a little sign around her neck with the address on. One of the security guards there finds the little girl and takes her to the Siddiqui house. And that is Mariam. But she only speaks American at this point. The family has brought her up as American. She doesn't speak Urdu. She's, all the rest of it. But, but those kids have done amazingly well, thanks to Fauzia. Fauzia had 4 kids of her own, but at the same time, she takes on these other 2 kids. Ahmed is now a qualified doctor, and he's doing great stuff. And, he and I have talked about his ambitions to work with Médecins Sans Frontières or whatever, Doctors Without Borders, to do good stuff in his life. And I'm very impressed with the young man. And then Mariam is just 1 year away from qualifying as a doctor, and she wants to be a doctor. So when we get her mum out, she can help repair the damage that's been done to her mum. So, these kids are doing as well.
The children, have they had help with their mental health and their trauma? And
well, I don't want to go into too much personal stuff for the kids, obviously. But they've had to have a huge amount of therapy because what they went through, no human being, let alone a child, should go through.
It's something out of that. I don't know if you know about this. When the Native American children, that they would pick them up, and how sometimes the Native Americans would pick up the white children, and how they would pick up. About this woman called Quanah Parker. Mm-hmm. She was, the Comanche, the one in Texas, the more aggressive sort of warring Native American tribes, they would replace their own when they would get killed with white children. So they picked up this woman who ended up marrying the chief, and her son was the last sort of leader of the Comanche people before the Texas Rangers wiped them out. So her name
Right.
was Quanah Parker. So it's this weird kind of, at that time there's a lot of weird, like these schools that the Americans would make to re-educate the Native American children. It's almost in that vein to me, this weird sort of child exchange policy.
It's very, very.
It's very odd.
And it does make you think, because, it's actually not easy. If you've got proper medical care around, it's not easy to kill little children, really. And it makes you think about Suleiman, that it's very possible that he was adopted into an American family, back in 2003, because obviously the Americans had it in their brains that they weren't going to let these kids back to their right family. And so it's possible that he is alive somewhere. And this is something that preys on the mind of the whole Siddiqui family.
Would
right?
there be any way to figure out the sort of the documented trail of him being transferred, his name being changed, being sent into an orphanage? Would that be a possibility?
I'm onto that. And look, I'm also on to Josh and Natasha, because I want to find these people. Because honestly, this is the thing. I'm not out to put anyone in prison. But this is, to me, the most shocking abuse of power of all the things that we as Americans did since 9/11. Because, just what got into these people's minds? And the only way to avoid repeating the lessons of history is to learn the lessons. And if you don't learn the lessons, you'll inevitably repeat them. And so at some point, I certainly plan to get a congressional hearing on exactly whose bright idea it was to do this. Because let's go back to the beginning, right? Because I think it's important to understand now why the US was so obsessed with Aafia Siddiqui. And, I've got to say, if you'd asked me 25 years ago, I just would not have believed what I'm about to say. But I've had so much experience of this now that I'm afraid now it's just sort of normal. With all the nuclear bomb plots and so forth, I've had various clients who've been accused of nuclear bomb plots. I'll test you on one. How about this? How's your physics?
Not that great, but go ahead.
Okay. With Binyam Mohammed, one of my British guys, he was supposedly, according to John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, Binyam was behind the nuclear bomb plots. And this is when they tortured him, Binyam was British, and when the Americans started abusing him, he told them to buzz off, and he's an obstinate guy, and he said, I'll talk to the British, but I'm not talking to you people. So that just made them suspicious. And so they start grilling him about what he knows about weapons of mass destruction. And he says, honestly, nothing. But then they torture him. So he says, I tell you what, I once saw this article about how to build a nuclear bomb. And this is what you do. You get your uranium, right? You've got some uranium lying around, I'm sure, somewhere because of your jihadi school.
Do you think car batteries have some?
No, there's no uranium in a car battery. I hate to break the news to you, but if you're going to... I think you are not attending any of your classes at jihadi school. I genuinely hope it's jihadi. Anyway, you get your uranium from wherever you get it. And then you've got to divide up your weapons-grade uranium from your other uranium, uranium-235, uranium-239. And so what you do is you put it in a bucket and you swing it around your head for 45 minutes. It's called the centrifuge.
You become the centrifuge. Centrifuge.
I mean, why does Iran spend all their time trying to make these expensive centrifuges when they could just swing it around in a bucket? The advice is don't put all your uranium in one bucket because, that's dangerous. And then, Bob's your uncle. That's divided up the uranium. And anyway, so this is what Binyam said. And they took it seriously.
But how does the weapons grade plutonium or uranium in this case? How does the isotope separate? Like, do you get it in?
That's the whole point of a centrifuge, is by spinning it at fast power.
I'm aware of
uranium-239 is heavier than uranium-235, right? You get that. So therefore, the 239 goes further out than the 235. That's how you divide it. Now, the thing about this is when Binyam told me that story in Guantanamo, I just laughed because I did physics. My son once asked me how to build a nuclear bomb. I can tell him. I'm afraid your jihadi school was rubbish, and you probably can't tell your children that. Anyway, so I looked it up.
They had this on paper, this testimony.
They did. And I Googled it, and sure enough, from the 1970s, there was a spoof article in a magazine written by this woman in Florida. And she was no longer around, but I tracked her daughter down to who was working at the LA Times at the moment. And her daughter wrote an article in the LA Times about how mum was behind the nuclear bomb plot. And it was just a total farce. And what you've got to understand in this, importantly, is if I torture you into saying you're guilty of jihad, too bad for you, right? You end up in Guantanamo, but it doesn't actually change the world. But if I torture you into creating a nuclear bomb plot, you terrify the whole world. And, this was meant to go off on 42nd Street in New York City.
Right.
And John Ashcroft actually said that. He broke into a visit to Moscow to say this nonsense.
A side note, was the anarchist cookbook at any point discussed in any of these interviews? That
Yeah, no, look, I'm very familiar with the anarchist cookbook because of a case I had back in New Orleans many years ago. Of course they're talking about that.
It was in the testimony files?
Well, because
Did
that's
they ask
what
any of the inmates about the Zapruder film? And if they might have seen it, the Zapruder film?
I don't know if they did, honestly. But, look, they came up with all of this stuff, and they did this with Aafia too. But now I have evidence, and this I would never have believed if I hadn't spent 25 years doing this. But do you know what the Americans thought that she was? This is what they said. And this is just every single thing about this is wrong. So first they say Aafia Siddiqui has a PhD in physics from MIT, right? Is that right or wrong?
It's wrong.
Wrong. She doesn't have a PhD from MIT at all. Her PhD is from Brandeis University, and it's in education. So they got that bit wrong. Second, they said MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is all about physics and maths. And so if you go there, that's what you study, right or wrong.
Isn't MIT a computer place?
MIT is a university. It teaches everything. They can teach you Russian if they want to.
Right.
So that's rubbish too. So they decided that Aafia Siddiqui was the ideal candidate for to be smuggled into the US after 2002 to create a dirty bomb in America, right? And she was obviously going to do that for Al-Qaeda. But who was going to work with them? You're not going to get this one. I'll give you 20 questions, 20 answers, and you won't get this one.
All right. Dead or alive?
No, they're now, this guy was dead then, but dead, but just also totally wrong. Who was co-conspiring with Al-Qaeda? It's sort of like Saddam Hussein, right? But that's more logical because these are two...
KSN, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama...
No. This is why you're so wrong. You don't have the approach that the CIA has, which you have to imagine yourself being much more stupid.
Right.
So they thought she was going to do that with the Colombian Medellin cartel. Now, where does this come from? I just don't know where these people get this stuff from. Anyway, so this is the root of the whole mythology of Aafia Siddiqui, evil American.
So she became a bit of a white whale for them because they thought she was the big... They gave her a name as well, like Grey Lady or some weird...
She was the Grey Lady of Al-Qaeda or whatever. And the whole and then they had all this blood diamonds nonsense where she supposedly went to Liberia to get blood diamonds to finance Al-Qaeda. And, that's another great one. What I'm really pleased about with that is the FBI got in trouble for not knowing about this terrible plot that bizarrely came from the UN blood diamonds people. And so the FBI put a whole group of people on it to work out how they missed this important thing and discovered it was all total nonsense. And that's the one that the FBI themselves disproved. But then they have all this other stuff. And once John Ronson wrote this great book about confirmation bias. Once you think something's true, you start seeing it everywhere. So they started interrogating all these people about Aafia Siddiqui. And
she's never been to Africa, right?
Never been there. Never. Well, she was when she was a child. She was in Gambia, but when her father was working there. But she'd never been to Liberia. And at that time, they could have proven, if they'd just done the work, that she was in America. So she wasn't in Liberia. So July the 16th, 2001, it wasn't that hard for them to figure it out, right? They had the date that they said this. So then they get these other things. And one of the interesting aspects, what I didn't understand when I first did these cases, is it was the bounties that got everyone going. But there was another thing with Aafia, which was actually unique. And I've talked to various people about this. When they were being interrogated under torture, they were shown pictures of people, and they were meant to tell stories about these folks. Now, by and large, they didn't know anything. But when you're being tortured, you get desperate to tell them something. One of the guys initially told me, and he was ashamed about this, and I'm not going to say who it was because I don't want to embarrass him, but he told me that when I was being tortured, they showed me all these pictures, and I knew I had to tell them something about someone. So I chose to say something about the woman. I didn't know who she was, but they said she was Aafia Siddiqui, so I said, oh, yeah, she did this, that, and the other. And I lied about it because I thought, surely no one will believe that. And so this is, again, how the whole story about Aafia gets compounded. And then there's a third factor. And the third factor is hell hath no fury as a man scorned. Her husband, Amjad Khan, they have a bitter divorce. And actually, he's in trouble because the FBI had raided their apartment in Boston in 2002 because he had ordered all sorts of weird stuff on the internet, including night vision goggles, bulletproof vests and stuff. Honestly, I don't know how he didn't get arrested at the time. And then $70,000 appeared in his bank account from Saudi Arabia.
Right, so he might have been the guy.
Well, he was certainly on the radar, and this is one reason.
His name never came up in the torture telephone game?
No, and this is interesting. And the reason it didn't was, and this is shocking, and I'd love to talk to old Amjad sometime. I think he's in Saudi now. But what's really extraordinary about him is when his children are kidnapped in 2003, he does nothing to get them back. He takes no steps to try and rescue them, unlike Fauzia. But then, sort of even odder, he's immediately married this other woman, had another daughter, called her Mariam. Instead of trying to get his daughter Mariam back from her kidnappers, he just gets another one. I mean, it's just weird.
This guy sounds like a spook, by the way.
Well, I don't know about a spook, but he was a spouse abuser and he abused Aafia, and there's all sorts of proof of that. And that's just very sad.
And he's had a very, as far as so there's this segment of pro-Musharraf era reporting that still happens. Very unfortunate, even some of the younger journalists nowadays, they try to spin this narrative that Aafia was some kind of international grey lady terrorist, super spy, working with the Medellin cartel and the African Liberian, blood diamond trade. This guy's over here as well, unfortunately, in the Urdu-speaking media. And all of them have to quote that guy. They all have to rely on the expert testimony of her ex-husband who doesn't care about 3 children, one of whom might be dead or have been smuggled to America. Weird guy.
He didn't take the time to meet his youngest child because Suleiman was born in September 2002 after the divorce proceedings began. Right. So he never even meet him. And then he says all this total nonsense. The Americans take the position that Aafia was living for 5 years in a place called Nazimabad, I think it's in Karachi. It's a place
North Nazimabad, yes. Yeah. And she was living with an Al-Qaeda operative who was her husband or something.
Ammar al-Baluchi, that's fabulous. Of course, I know Ammar in Guantanamo, and that's physically impossible because, they say there's other madness. It's just incredible how silly
Did
it
you
is.
ask
They
him
say,
about? Did you ask him about Aafia?
yeah, of course I did.
What did he
Now,
say?
well, none of what the US says is true, but the US says that Aafia went to Ghazni in July 2008 searching for her husband, Amar al-Baluchi. Well, he had been detained in April 2003, as was publicly known. He was in Guantanamo by September 2006, as was publicly known. So who was going to go to Ghazni looking for him? But in the meantime, Amjad is saying that he sees Aafia driving around Karachi in 2004. Well, if you're the father of these children, you don't think you maybe ought to chase up and, find out where your kids are? All of that's just nonsense. And the reason he said that stuff was he was actually on the most wanted list briefly in 2003. And he met with the Americans and with the Pakistan intelligence, and he told them all this nonsense and tried to put it on his soon-to-be ex-wife. So, that's part of the problem. And, we understand that. We all know about bitter divorces, but it's just another pretty shocking thing, really.
No, this Amjad fellow, I'm not fully aware of his story and his side of the of the story, but from what I've gleaned is he's a very unsavory sort of character, and he definitely took some sort of deal from the Pakistani intelligence services.
Well, that may well be true. I would love to, put him on record. All the things he says, I'd love to have him under oath repeat. But, that's never happened. He just goes around bad-mouthing his ex-wife and undermining his children, which is unfortunate. Anyway, that's about where we are now. The problem is this. So let's get to the real problem we have to solve. Aafia is in FMC Carswell. I've been to pretty much every death row in America. I've been to Guantanamo 42 times. FMC Carswell is worse than all of them. And, this is one of the things that motivates me, to be honest. I am so angry that my country is treating 976 women in this prison in such a horrendous way, where 13 of the guards have been convicted of rape or sexual abuse. One of the Christian ministers has been convicted. Aafia insists to me that she's been a victim of sexual assault and rape. But at the same time, the rest of the prison is dysfunctional too. She's never been allowed an imam. She's never had a spiritual advisor. I'm proud to say that Imam Omar Suleiman has agreed to go see her. I really like the guy. He's one of the few people in the world that actually. I'm 6'3.5", but he's like 6'6", so I can look up to him. But he's a delightful guy, and he would be.
He's an honorable man.
She's never seen an independent doctor. We're trying to get a female Muslim doctor in to see her. She's not allowed to talk to the media. We try to get media in to see her. But overall, the most important thing in the short term is to improve her lot. She is in administrative segregation, effectively isolation, has been for 14 years, which is longer than all the other 10,250 women in federal custody in America. And this is just shocking. And the reason she's there is because nowhere in the 1,089 pages of her medical records that I've got is the single acceptance that she spent 5 years being tortured. So they think all these stories she says about her children being abducted are false. And they think she's obstreperous instead of being a victim of this incredible abuse. So that prison is awful. But then in the end, it's not a solution to just get her treated better in prison. She needs to be out of there. And so this is where we need to work day and night to get her out. Maybe not to Pakistan, maybe to Qatar or someplace like that.
Definitely not to Pakistan. No, Pakistan, she needs to go, I'll be honest, as a Pakistani citizen, as somebody who has some fair understanding of how Pakistan operates, she needs to go to a third neutral, sort of like a Qatar, maybe, or somewhere that she can be safe and secure, something like a Malaysia potentially. But a Qatar would be definitely ideal.
That would be great. And Fawzia and I met with the Qatari authorities who really, look, I love those people. They're trying to reconcile the whole world at the moment. And you know what Aafia needs? She's not going to come out and hold lots of press conferences. She is traumatized. And she needs to be in a setting where she's with loved ones, getting the treatment she needs, and not being abused. And one of the lessons we learned from Guantanamo is even if the Americans tried to give her therapy, which they don't, you can't get therapy from the people who tortured you. And so we got to have her in a setting. So Qatar would be ideal. We can figure out a way to have her in a hospital setting there for as long as she needs, with her family and with everyone they're able to see her. And she's no threat to anyone unless they leave her in prison, in which case she's a big threat to everyone, because we're going to carry on exposing people until we get her out.
Right. We'll get to her current condition in the case that she's battling right now. But there seems to be an idea that one of the main hurdles in her release are the Pakistani authorities. How true is it? Is it just simply that she's been buried under sort of bureaucratic red tape, and it's out of sight, out of mind kind of situation, or is there an active pursuit of trying to suppress her case because all the embarrassing laundry would come out?
I'm afraid being subverted by certain people in the Pakistani deep state. Now, here I wouldn't blame any of the politicians. I think pretty much every politician in Pakistan's on side because they know which sides their bread's buttered. There's no votes in opposing a release, but there are lots of votes in helping it. But everywhere we press, and I just want to meet with the people who have problems releasing them. But from what I find out from the people I talk to in the military or the ISI, is the moment you mention Aafia's name, everyone tells you to back off.
Yeah, there's two cases that are the big boogeyman cases, which is Aafia's case and the Lal Masjid case, the Red Mosque case in Islamabad. Both of these were Musharraf-era policies. I don't know if you know about the latter. But if you mention these cases in any high-level conversation with anyone in the military or the ISI or anyone in any sort of civil intelligence either, they have a panic attack because they know...
There are two others you're not mentioning. One is Shakil Afridi.
Shakil Afridi, I didn't mention this because it's not in the zeitgeist as much in terms of the common public's perceptions, but these two at least, they're popular. And
the third one is Imran Khan, of course. They're not real happy about you talking about that either, frankly.
The one with Imran Khan, at least it gets more airtime, and I suspect that that's not something they'll be able to brush over so easily. With the Shakil Afridis or the people in the Lal Masjid or with Aafia Siddiqui, these are regular people. These aren't powerful, politically connected people. I mean, with Imran Khan, I think he has a political party. He has his lot cut out. He can take care of himself. But with Aafia,
scored a century without a bat, as they say.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. He scored a century without having a cricket bat, as they say. He got 100 seats in Parliament without having his emblem.
He did, essentially.
Yeah. But look, going back, you're right that people don't want us talking about this, but they need to get with the program. Because, frankly, Aafia is a far greater threat to them in prison than she would be out of prison. And that's what they need to understand. And I just want to talk to them. I'm not here to do anything other than try and get people to see the facts of life. And this has been true with every case in Guantanamo, that the more people resist, the worse off it gets for them. Because it just forces us to expose more and more stuff. I don't want to. If I didn't have to do another hour's work on Aafia's case in my life, I'd be very happy. But we're never going to give up. So the longer it goes on, the worse it gets for everybody.
Because your goal is to get Aafia out and to get her the help she needs. But the more the case is dragged on, the more that the Pakistani state does not cooperate. In fact, actively sabotages the case, the more of the case details will come out. That's as simple as that. So you as a lawyer have a responsibility to your client, and you're not like some journalist trying to sniff out a story or somebody who wishes to expose the government of Pakistan or the deep state or the intelligence. Your job is to represent Aafia Siddiqui in court. And
in court and in the court of public opinion.
And in the court of public opinion, obviously, because she's incarcerated.
I do this for love, not money. I've never been paid by a client in my life. And so, I just carry on doing it until it gets resolved. That's just the way the world goes. So, if it takes a year, it takes a year. If it takes 10 years, it takes 10 years. I don't care. I mean, I do care. I want to get it resolved as quickly as possible. But
is it like almost like a game of chicken where they expect that you wouldn't play your team, you guys wouldn't play your hand with regards to revealing certain facts about the Pakistani state and how they operated, and that's what they're banking on because they know that at the end of the day you need their help with some of these things to be resolved?
I don't need the help, frankly. I mean, all I can do, all I need to do, is persuade Judge Berman that he was lied to. And he's a federal judge. He's in his 80s. He's a pretty decent guy. And I think when he hears how much he was lied to, he's going to order the right thing. And if he does, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Then she gets ordered released. And then the only question becomes where she goes to. But, I can't rest until that happens. And I'm going to keep on going back to Afghanistan and going wherever I have to go. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. They did this to me once before in a case, Krishna Maharaj, a British guy on death row in Florida, and they wouldn't do the right thing. And I ended up going to Medellin, and I got 6 members of the Colombian cartel to admit they did it. And then I got this cop to admit that they had a deal with the cartels to murder people in Florida and so on and so forth. And, I ended up writing a book about that case because it was so fascinating. And the longer they make me work on the case, the more is going to come out. Which, I don't mind because I really find this absolutely intriguing. But at the same time, it's really a waste of everyone's time, isn't it?
Certainly, it would be very tragic that the government would continue to embarrass themselves because I think it's a disservice to the Pakistani people that the state has been doing, and not only with with her being sold off, you can argue that at that time there was a dictatorship and we didn't have control of the levers of power, but right now in a so-called elected, democratically represented government with we've never had as much of a free press than right now. There's no excuse for us not to get back one of our own citizens and have the people who were involved with that case be answerable for this kind of criminal negligence. Or
I don't even want that. Look, one of the things I respect about the Taliban in Afghanistan is they're taking a reconciliation approach, much like happened in South Africa after apartheid. Right. And truth and reconciliation is massively better as a way to get to the reality.
I agree with you. I don't think that it's too. The business of the Pakistani state is too long. It's too long and dirty a history for us to punish everyone and then sort of have. And I think it's not only it is practically infeasible. It's also, I think that kind of retributive justice would lead Pakistan into a worse situation. Even though I'm not totally opposed to retributive justice in a normal situation, but it's not normal. So a truth and reconciliation.
I'm against retribution in every instance.
I know.
And I think one thing that's actually fascinating about Afghanistan right now is, their emir has said, no retribution. And as well as I know that for a Pashtun person to be told you can't do that, it's a big deal. That they're respecting you. And if you've had 45 years of warfare like all Afghans have, it's really the only way to go. Otherwise, you're going to be killing each other for the next 20 generations. And so that's the way to go. Now, Pakistan, I have great admiration for Pakistan. I have a very soft spot in my heart for it because I've done a lot of stuff in Pakistan over the years. And, that your country really needs to get the military and the ISI out of politics, because otherwise you'll never get in a situation where you can be a true democracy. And, look, that's fine. They can keep a lot of the money if they want. I don't care. But we just got to let the political system work the way the political system works and get everyone on the same side. And the military is there to defend Pakistan, not to take over the government. And that's where one needs to get to. But that's up to you guys, not me. I may be named Clive after Clive of India, but it's not my role. So
No, you can come back. You can be Clive too.
No, I
We'll
don't
let you
think so. He was corrupt. And, Clive of India was the first British person to be tried for corruption in office. And you know how he got off? He bribed the jury. So that's
Really?
typical. Yeah.
Well,
I've got a lot of
you can be Clive too, and you can redeem yourself. You can redeem the name.
a lot of redemption to do, I'm afraid.
No, I mean, in all of this, I think the silver lining is that there's people like you out there. There's people that work with you out there, and it's a very touching sort of. It transcends the sort of national boundaries that limit us in these sorts of wars and our governments and what they do. It's a human experience. The fact that you're able to.
It's really important. When I first went to Yemen, I was really touched. That in the early days of Guantanamo, I would travel around the world and hold press conferences and say, look, I'm here to help you because we're doing some pretty bad stuff. And the thing about it is if you're disenfranchised and poor in Yemen, your per capita national income is $300 a year, or it was back then. An American lawyer is going to charge you $3,000 an hour, bizarrely, in New York. I went to Columbia Law School. That's what they took a one-way subway line to Wall Street, and that's what they charged. So that means that a Yemeni, if he or she didn't eat for a year, could pay for 6 minutes of an American lawyer's time. So you can't get justice as a poor person or even as a rich person on that, which is why, as an OPWM, an old privileged white male, my duty is to go around and help people in those circumstances to make up for it. But it's a great privilege to do that. I love that. And if I didn't do it, my mum from heaven, where she probably is, well, I'm sure I'll never see her there.
No, she'll be fine.
I don't know about that. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
It's an educated guess. I mean, it's as good as where is the safety on an M4. So do what you will. I mean, we can hope for the best for all of us, inshallah. Honestly, it's a rotten world, and honestly, it's an existence worth living. Mashallah, it's very honorable what you've done with your life. I'm sure your mother would be proud if she saw you, inshallah. And one day, so
we'll see.
The thing with Aafia's case is where does it go from here? What is their timeline in your head, in the team's head? What is she thinking? What is Fawzia?
So the timeline is this. I'm going to file in the U.S. court in July. Now, I haven't got everything together yet, but I've got enough together to sink them beyond trace. And then I hope we'll get the judge to move this fairly expeditiously. In the meantime, I'm approaching the White House for some form of commutation or some deal. If they want, I've talked to various politicians about the swap, doctor for doctor, Dr. Shakil Afridi for Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. That would be an elegant solution for everyone, because the Americans want Afridi and, we want to get Aafia justice. But we got to play every different course.
Have any of the politicians been amicable to the idea? Have they been?
Look, I mean, you take Representative Sherman. He's obsessed with getting Shakil Afridi back, and would certainly strongly promote the swap. I've talked to a number of other politicians. I don't really want to be public with their names, but about getting through to the White House. Because look, there's a moment between November the 6th and January the 21st where you can get things done in America. And on November the 5th, the election happens. I suspect Trump will be elected.
Same.
I won't be voting for him myself, but I suspect that's what will happen. So then Biden has 10 weeks.
Are you going to vote for the Green Party?
No, I'll vote for Biden. Right. I mean, Biden's done some good things and some really stupid things, but of the two octogenarians, he's much the best. So, I think he'll lose, but then he'll have 10 weeks from November the 6th until the new president's sworn in on January the 21st. And in those 10 weeks, he can do justice because he's got nothing to lose. So at that point, I hope the government will act. Now, we'll see. If that doesn't work, Trump's always a possibility because you never know when he'll wake up in the middle of the night and do something mad. So, we'll keep on going. And then in the meantime, if Judge Berman does the right stuff, then he just orders her release, either through compassionate release or through reducing her sentence or throwing out her conviction based on the new evidence.
If
So
he
we got
reduced
lots
her
of
sentence, wouldn't she have served a large portion of it already?
Oh, she would. I mean, if you just take out the terrorism enhancement, which is based on total nonsense, then she's done all she'd have to do. So they'd have to release her. And at that point, they deport her, right? Because that once she's released with a conviction, she gets deported. That's what she wants. So, we would deport her to wherever we work out.
If they would deport her to Pakistan, there's no exiting Pakistan.
Well, who knows? I think if she was in Pakistan, we can work Pakistan over. But at the same time, I think it'd be better for everyone if she went to a neutral place and just got treatment.
Absolutely, I would agree. Absolutely. When they do commute the sentence, or they do reduce the sentence or release these people generally from Guantanamo or any of these black sites where they've been illegally holding all sorts of people from different nationalities, I've read about this and I've seen in some films that a lot of the home countries, especially during the 20 years of the War of Terror, the home country wouldn't usually, the American press will want to receive the citizen. So they would send them to Uzbekistan sometimes they would send them to, they would send them around weird places.
Actually, that's not the case. I mean, the overwhelming majority, and I've represented 87 of the prisoners in Gitmo, most of them have come back to their home countries.
Okay.
Now, in cases where they can't, and Yemen's a good example because Yemen's so messed up now, we've worked out another country, and Qatar has played a role in that. I represented Sami El-Haj, who was the Al Jazeera journalist in Gitmo, who's a lovely guy, who is the godfather of my son, as a matter of fact. Qatar was great in getting him out. And then, we've got different people to different places. So it's just, and I've done a lot of work in making that happen, because really the office that works on that for the US State Department is underfunded and under-resourced. So we work quite closely with them to try to help them out. And so we'll work something out. That's not a problem.
No, but my question is, when they are sent back, is there some sort of formal apology or some sort of...
You think the US is going to apologize? You've got to be kidding me. No, we've sued them. No, nothing, unfortunately. So there's never an apology. And there's only once that we've got the US to pay compensation. We've got other countries to pay. The British, we caught their fingers in the cookie jar. They were mixed up in the wrongdoing against their own citizens. And the British government ended up having to pay a lot of money to them, which is good. And a few other countries like Canada had to pay 10 million to Omar Khadr. So, yeah, we pursue those things. I hope to get some more justice at some point. For example, for Saifullah Paracha, who had all of his wealth stolen from him when he was thrown in Guantanamo Bay. And we need to try to do that, but it's very hard to get money. And you only once in the history of the War of Terror have we got an apology, and that was a Libyan who the British had done terrible things by. And he didn't want money. We got him £1 in compensation. But we forced the British government to do a public apology for what they did. And I think that's good. I'd want an apology if I was them, but it's very hard to get countries to do that.
It's not nothing. I think the apology has an implicit admission of the guilt. And that's something that I think for a lot of people to get back their dignity, perhaps, that would be very important, to be recognized as an innocent person, not as a terrorist, and be apologized for.
And for explanation, I mean, as you've suggested, there's so many rumors and nasty things being said about Aafia Siddiqui.
Yes.
We need people to just say, all right, sorry, admit that was wrong. But it's very hard to get them to do that. I'd like to think we would, but we'll see.
No, I mean, all the best to you guys and the work that you're doing. And I hope that the expeditious sort of timeline that you've highlighted is it's faster than you think. And I hope that this thing works out, because Aafia Siddiqui's been a case. She's become more than just an individual person now. She's an idea about how the average Pakistani citizen views the state and the American state, and their relationship between the between the two, between the Pakistani and the American state, and how they view themselves in the world.
Right.
She's more than, and I know this is more of a burden to put on somebody who's already been through so much. And like you said, she would, if when she comes out, inshallah, she wouldn't be doing press conferences and all. But that would be a great symbol for a lot of young people who grew up with that knowing that there can be, you know, through the judicial processes, through the way of the law, there are people out there who can help. You can get out, clear your name, and you can be declared innocent. That would be a great big deal, I think, for a lot of young people.
I think what you're illustrating, though, is the way it really happens. And I've got a project right now where I'm exonerating people who are wrongfully executed in America. And you can't ever get the courts to do it, but you can do it on camera. And the media is the court of public opinion is going to get to the truth in the end. And you've just given her, over the last couple of hours, more of a fair trial than she's ever going to get in the court of law. And I've got people working on Aafia's case who are making, multiple part documentaries, then films, because that's how we're going to exonerate her. And it's another illustration of why it's a mistake for the powers that be to make us keep on working on this, because I think her story is so extraordinary and so important that the longer they make us work on it, the more films, the more podcasts, the more songs, the more...
Whatever you guys produce, whatever you guys make, just send it our way. We'll try to popularize it as much as we can. If you guys want, when you're done with it in parts, we'll try to screen it in schools, in universities. I think that would be the best way forward. Because you're right. You're right.
And I hope in the end it'll inspire people to take human rights up for others, because goodness knows there are enough people who need the help. And one of the great privileges I find, is the US Constitution really gives me so much power. I can get justice for a lot of people. And that's fabulous. But then so can the youth of Pakistan. And the Pakistan Constitution is actually a fabulous document. And there are some good judges who I've got this judge, Ijaz Sadar in Islamabad, who's having hearings. We've got another one this Friday, who's just incredibly good as a judge and is the sort of person that Pakistan should be proud of. And he was one of the 6 judges who signed that letter about people stopping, they should stop trying to coerce judges. Right. Because that's just unjust Pakistani, frankly.
No, it's really tragic to see that in even the American justice system, the judges have been complaining about being harassed from the intelligence agencies.
I mean, the truth is I can get justice in America for a lot of people, and whether it be through a court order or through exposing stuff, and that's good.
This idea of the court of public opinion, I think this is ideal, because for the Pakistani state, a lot of these things, the way it operates is that the more they're highlighted, the more they're embarrassed about it, then they have to capitulate, because there's a I don't know, there's a saying in Urdu, it essentially means that Pakistan is basically, it's not used specifically for Pakistan, but this is true of Pakistan, is that how would I translate this? This is nuts. To spit and then to lick.
Say it in Urdu first. Say it in Urdu first.
Pakistan की आदत है कि थूक के चाटता है. So the idea is that the habit that Pakistan has formed is that once we've spit, we'll lap it all back up, because we weren't supposed to spit there. It's a weird metaphor. I don't know if it makes sense in English.
Well, I tried to translate it, and it does sound like a dog lapping up its vomit. It's not a great.
It's not the idea. The idea is that maybe you shouldn't choose to spit when you know you have to lap it up again. That's the idea.
Okay, good. Yes, I shall tell my dog not to.
Licking one's on spit.
Sorry, yeah. So the audio guy has said to lick up one's own spit. He did a Google Translate.
All right. Okay.
If that's a close enough English equivalent, I don't know. But it essentially is this sort of this stubbornness to change, and it doesn't happen until there is public pressure to do so.
Well, long may we teach the authorities not to spit as much in public. It's not a nice.
All right. Thank you very much.
On that note,
Thank you for your time, Clive, and I hope that we can follow up on this discussion, inshallah, when more of the case details come out. We chose not to discuss the sort of gory details of the kinds of physical and sexual abuse, because I think it's to no end can we unpack what those things are. I think it was more important what you did. Thank you very much for your time. Is there anything that the people can do right now to support Aafia's case? Yes.
So look, and you're welcome to put out my email address if you like, which is clivestaffordsmith2020@gmail.com. And because people can contact me, and there are several things we can do. The first and foremost and simplest is you can write to Aafia to express in as much detail as you like. It has to be in English, I'm afraid, because the Americans won't accept anything else. Something to encourage her, because then I cut and paste those into letters that I send her every 2 weeks just to encourage her. Okay. And it has been for her that she actually reads them out to people in prison to show she hasn't been forgotten. And that's really powerful. Second, in terms of getting an imam in, I want the population to deluge the prison, the FMC Castle, and perhaps you can put out their address, which I'll share with you, to say that it's shocking, given the First Amendment in the US and the right to...
Would they want the people to email the prison or call them or show up outside?
No, both. But I've got the email address of the warden's office, and you can just send it to the warden's office, that it is shocking that Imam Omar Suleiman has not been allowed in to see her, because she needs that. At the moment, her religious solace is talking to me, which is just not up to much. Then third, doctors. It is horrifying that the prison hasn't allowed independent doctors in there. And I'd like doctors to express that. I'd like as many doctors as possible to contact me who'll sign on to an application to get a proper independent doctor in to see him. And the same with the imams, by the way. And then...
have you contacted APNA?
APNA?
APNA is the American Pakistani Doctors Association.
Oh, okay. No, but my experience of many American Pakistan organizations is they're shattered. But I hope that's not true about them. Then the number one thing in terms of our prison conditions is that they should move her out of FMC Caswell. And my ambition now, because they piss me off, is we're going to close that place down, like they closed Dublin prison in California a month ago for the sexual abuse that was going on there. And we need to do the same to FMC Caswell. It's just shocking. And then the big one, of course, is to contact the White House and tell them what's what, to make sure that we get justice for Aafia, or you can contact Judge Berman in Southern District of New York and tell him. Because all of these things are helpful. So, the more of the people who listen to your show or watch it,
I hope so.
The better. And I'll send you the contact details for you.
You send me all these details, and I'll make sure that the people get to this, inshallah. Thank you, Clive. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. I hope you're successful in this particular case, because I think it's about time that Aafia comes out.
We will be successful. I don't know exactly, but we will be. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you. Good luck.